Welcome to Horrified Stories, where fear comes to life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Let's start our today's story, The Vanishing Customers at the 24/7 Diner. I never wanted the night shift. It wasn't exactly thrilling to serve truckers and insomniacs in a diner lit by flickering neon signs, but work was work, and in this town, options were scarce. So, when Hal, the owner of Lou's 24/7 Diner, offered me the position, I reluctantly agreed. Lou's Saturday at the edge of Route 9, a lonely stretch of highway that seemed to go nowhere. Its retro exterior, a worn-out chrome finish, and a massive, open 24-hour sign had seen better days. Most people only stopped here because they had no other choice. My first few shifts were uneventful. I served overcooked burgers, reheated coffee, and slices of pie that were more crust than filling. Regulars came and went, their stories predictable and their faces familiar. It was monotonous, but it paid the bills. Then came the night when things started to get strange. It was a Wednesday, just past 1 a.m. The diner was empty except for me and Trish, the cook. Trish was in her late 40s, a no-nonsense woman who could fry an egg and shut down a drunk trucker with equal efficiency. She barely looked up from her crossword puzzles, and we rarely spoke unless someone placed an order. The bell above the door jingled, snapping me out of my boredom. A man stepped in. He was tall and thin, wearing a weathered trench coat that seemed too heavy for the mild night. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, as if sleep had eluded him for years. "Just coffee," he mumbled, sliding into the booth farthest from the counter. I poured his coffee and placed it in front of him. He didn't say thank you, didn't even look at me. He just stared into the black liquid, his fingers trembling slightly. "Long drive?" I asked, trying to make conversation. He didn't answer. Shrugging, I returned to my station behind the counter. The minutes dragged on. I glanced at the clock on 30 a.m. The man hadn't taken a single sip of his coffee. When I looked up again, he was gone. The booth was empty, the cup of coffee untouched. "Did you see him leave?" I asked Trish. She didn't look up. "Oh, the guy in the trench coat. He was sitting in the back booth." Trish frowned. "No one's been here all night, Amy." I stared at the booth. The coffee cup was still there, steam rising faintly. I didn't argue with Trish. Maybe she hadn't noticed, but a chill crept up my spine as I cleared the table. The following night, old man Harvey, one of our regulars, shuffled in at his usual time around 2 a.m. He was a retired farmer, always wearing overalls and a straw hat that seemed glued to his head. He ordered the same thing every night, a slice of cherry pie and a glass of milk. "Evening, Amy," he greeted, his voice raspy but cheerful. I smiled, already grabbing his pie from the display case. "Your usual?" "You know it." Harvey took his seat by the window, where he could watch the empty road. He ate slowly, savoring every bite as if it were his last meal. At 2:30 a.m., he waved goodbye and headed out the door. That next night, Harvey didn't show up. It wasn't unusual for him to skip a night, but when he missed 3 nights in a row, I grew concerned. I asked around town, but no one had seen him. By the end of the week, the local sheriff stopped by the diner. Harvey's truck was found abandoned by Route 9. He told me, no sign of him, and I tightened in my stomach. I thought about the man in the trench coat, the untouched coffee. 2 weeks later, the diner had mostly returned to its sleepy rhythm. Then, on a quiet Sunday night, a couple walked in. They were young, dressed in clothes that screamed city folk. The woman clung to the man's arm, her eyes darting around the diner like she expected something to jump out at her. "Welcome," I said, forcing a smile. "Manners on the table." "Thanks," the man replied, his voice tense. They ordered pancakes and eggs. Eating quickly, their conversation hushed. Every so often, they glanced at the door, as if afraid someone might walk in. At 3 a.m., they paid their bill and left. The next morning, their car was found parked at the edge of the woods, keys still in the ignition. They were nowhere to be found. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Customers were vanishing, and the diner was at the center of it. I started keeping a journal, recording every strange detail: the man in the trench coat, Harvey's disappearance, the young couple. I even asked Trish if she noticed anything unusual, but she just laughed it off. "You're overthinking it, Amy," she said. Maybe I was, or maybe I was next. The days bled into each other, each shift at the diner feeling more like an endless loop than a fresh start. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone new was watching me. It wasn't just the missing customers, or the strange way people seemed to disappear after visiting Lou's. It was the eerie silence that had settled over the diner. and the way it felt like the walls were closing in on me. The next Thursday night, I worked the shift alone. Trish was taking a rare night off, and Hal was nowhere to be found, probably holed up in his office. As usual, the diner was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the low sizzle from the grill. Around 1:30 a.m., I decided to clean the back storage room. We had a map of the area pinned to the wall, a relic from when the diner had first opened. It showed Route 9, a network of back roads, and small towns nearby. I hadn't thought much of it before, but that night, something made me pause. I looked at the map more closely. The towns around Luz were listed in fine print, but one small town, a Verhart, wasn't there. I leaned in, tracing my fingers over the spot where it should have been. It was gone. Confused, I checked the edges of the map. There was no tear, no mark suggesting it had been tampered with. It was as if Everhart had never existed. I was about to walk away when a faint noise caught my attention, a soft scraping sound, like someone was moving something across the floor. I turned, heart racing, but the storage room was empty. I hurriedly finished cleaning and went back to the front. That next night, a woman entered the diner. She was pale, her hair a tangled mess, and her clothes were wrinkled as if she'd been wearing them for days. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, like she hadn't slept in weeks. "Coffee," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible. I poured her a cup and set it on the counter. She didn't speak again. Instead, she stared at the cup, her fingers trembling as she wrapped them around the handle. I watched her from behind the counter. Something was off about her, the way she moved, the way she didn't blink or shift her gaze. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen her before. A few minutes passed, and I went over to check if she needed anything else. The cup was still there, untouched. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" I asked. She didn't answer. Her eyes flicked toward the window, then back to me. There was a brief moment of hesitation before she stood up, dropping a few bills on the counter. I didn't think much of it, just assuming she was in a hurry. I turned to clean up her mess. When I glanced back at the seat she had occupied, the woman was gone. The bell above the door had rung. I stood there for a moment, frowning. I'd seen no one leave. I checked the bathroom and the parking lot. Nothing. The woman had vanished, and there was no trace of her. Not a single footprint in the dust. Not even a faint scent lingering in the air. She was gone. The weirdness seemed to escalate after that. I began to notice more things, small details that didn't make sense. The clocks would stop ticking in the middle of the night, only to start again a few minutes later. The air inside the diner would feel unnaturally cold, despite the heaters running full blast. But the worst night came 2 weeks after the woman vanished. It was just past 3 a.m. when the power went out. The hum of the refrigerator and the sizzle from the grill stopped at the same time, leaving only the sound of my breath filling the otherwise still air. I waited, hoping it was just a temporary glitch, but the lights didn't flicker back on. I grabbed the flashlight from under the counter and made my way to the fuse box. It was in the small back room, next to the old freezer. I clicked the flashlight on, casting a beam of light over the dusty floor. There, next to the freezer, was something that hadn't been there before, a shape. At first, I thought it was a shadow, but as I stepped closer, I realized it was a figure, a tall man in a dark coat, standing motionless in the corner. His back was turned to me, but I could feel his presence, as if he was waiting for something. I frowned, my heart thudding in my chest. The man didn't move. He didn't even acknowledge me. I took a tentative step backward, my hands trembling. But before I could turn to leave, the power came back on. The lights burst to life, blinding me for a second. I blinked, and when my vision cleared, the man was gone. The following night, I wasn't surprised when the man in the trench coat returned. He slid into the same booth in the back, staring at the black coffee in front of him. I felt a chill creep up my spine as I approached, my hands shaking. "Coffee, again?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly, not speaking, his eyes fixed on the cup. I poured the coffee, but couldn't take my eyes off him. There was something familiar about him, something that tugged at the back of my mind. He wasn't just another lost traveler. I had to know who he was. I had to ask. "Who are you?" I blurted out. The man slowly raised his eyes to mine, and for a split second, I saw something I couldn't explain. His face twisted in a way that wasn't human, his eyes hollow and dark, like empty wells. But before I could react, the door opened, and the bell jingled. I turned to look, and when I turned back, the man was gone. I couldn't keep ignoring it anymore. Whatever was happening at Lou's 24/7 diner wasn't just some strange coincidence. Something dark, something terrible, had taken root in this place? I didn't know who to turn to. The sheriff didn't believe me. Trish laughed at my paranoia. And, oh well, hell wasn't the kind of person who'd care, unless it was about making money. But I couldn't shake the feeling that every missing customer, every strange occurrence, was leading to something far worse, something I wasn't prepared for. And I wasn't sure if I could escape it before it was too late. I had been working at Lou's for over a month now, and the dread I'd been carrying had turned from a gnawing unease into a constant companion. The walls felt like they were closing in. I was certain that something was wrong with the diner, something beyond what I could explain. I had to know what was happening. There had to be an answer, some way to stop it before it was too late. The following Wednesday, after another long, uneventful shift, I closed the diner alone. Trish had gone home early, and Hal had left for one of his business meetings. I was just finishing up sweeping the floor when I noticed something on the counter, an envelope, wedged between two salt shakers. It was old-fashioned, the kind of envelope you find in a dusty drawer. There was no return address, only my name written in a hurried, almost frantic scrawl. My fingers trembled as I opened it, my eyes scanning the contents. If you want to leave, you must leave tonight. Don't trust anyone, not even yourself. The diner is alive, and it's waiting for you. I read it over and over again, trying to make sense of it. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. But the words, they felt like a warning, like someone knew what was happening. I glanced around, half expecting someone to step out of the shadows, but the diner was as silent as it had always been. The familiar hum of the refrigerator and the clatter of dishes, the only sound. The next morning, I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to learn more about Lou's 24/7 diner. There had to be something hidden beneath its chipped exterior, some piece of history that could explain the strange occurrences. I made my way to the town library, a dusty, forgotten building at the edge of Route 9. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Barrow, greeted me with a faint smile. "You're looking for something, dear?" she asked, her voice raspy but warm. "I need to know about Lou's 24/7 diner," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It's history. Anything you can tell me." Mrs. Barrow's smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet concern. "Why would you want to know about that place?" There's something wrong. People are disappearing, and I think it's connected to the diner." Her eyes darkened, and she leaned in close. "Don't go digging into that, child. Some things are better left forgotten." I pushed for more, but she wouldn't say another word. Eventually, she reluctantly led me to a box of old newspapers in the back of the library, telling me to search for anything related to the diner. After hours of flipping through yellowing pages, I found a series of articles from the late 1970s. The diner had been built in the 1950s by a man named Lou O'Donnell. At first, it was a thriving stop for travelers and locals alike. But then, something changed. The diner's reputation soured, and rumors spread that strange things happened there at night, disappearances, odd occurrences, and whispers of something far more sinister lurking within. The most unsettling article was a local news story from 1977. It spoke of a man named Victor Darnell, who had been working the night shift at Lou's when he vanished without a trace. His coworkers reported that, the night before he disappeared, he'd been acting strangest behavior, erratic, his eyes wide with fear. The article didn't provide any answers. It only left more questions. That night, something happened that made it impossible for me to deny the truth any longer. It was just past midnight when a couple walked in, an older man and woman. They were dressed in Sunday best, the kind of clothes people wore to church. They Saturday in a booth near the back, not saying a word, their faces as stiff as if they were sitting at a wake. I went over to take their order, and that's when I noticed it. Their iced tea weren't right. They were wide, glazed over, as if they weren't really seeing anything at all. "Can I get you anything?" I asked, my voice shaky. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just the coffee, sweetheart, black." I went to the counter, trying to shake off the unease that gripped me. I poured the coffee and brought it to their table, but as I set the cup down in front of the man, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The reflections in the window, those weren't the same people sitting at the table. The figures in the reflection were younger, their faces fuller, healthier, and then, as I stared, they slowly began to fade away. I blinked, and when I looked back at the table, the couple was gone, not just from the booth, but from the diner entirely. I rushed to the front door and checked the parking lot. Their car was still parked outside, keys in the ignition, but the couple was nowhere to be found. The next night, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I had to know if anyone else had experienced what I had seen. I decided to go to the only person who might know, Old Man Harvey. But when I arrived at his house, I found it abandoned. The house was dark, the front porch light flickering like it was on its last legs. I knocked, but no one answered. I tried the back door, it was open. I stepped inside, calling out for Harvey. The house smelled musty, like no one had lived there for years. I went upstairs to his bedroom, and that's when I found it, a journal. It was filled with scribbled notes, mostly incoherent, but as I flipped through the pages, one phrase stood out, repeated over and over again. It's the diner. It's not just a place, it's something else. The further I read, the more terrified I became. Harvey knew something. He had been researching the diner just like me. At the end of the journal, there was one final note. It's time to leave. If you don't, it'll take you to. I was being drawn deeper into whatever had taken root at Luz. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but they were leading me down a path I didn't want to follow. I was trapped. The diner, the people who vanished. The warnings, there was no escaping it. I couldn't stay, but could I leave? If I left, would it follow me? And if I stayed, would I disappear like the others? As I stared into the diner's empty parking lot, the weight of the decision pressed down on me. And that's when I heard its faintest whisper, like a voice carried on the wind. You can never leave. I stood frowning, staring at the empty parking lot as the wind howled around me. The voice whisper was gone, but its echo lingered in my mind. I couldn't escape. The diner had chosen me, and now there was no turning back. Everything about Luz 24/7's diner had changed in the past few weeks. The walls, the floors, the very air I breathed, all of it felt alive, as if the diner itself had some kind of consciousness, watching me, pulling me deeper into its grip. It wasn't just a place of food and conversation anymore. It had become something darker, something far older than anyone could imagine. I walked slowly back inside, the door creaking behind me like a warning. The diner was eerily quiet, the soft hum of the neon lights above the counter flickering, casting strange shadows across the room. I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. Something was coming. It was only a matter of time. That night, a customer came in who I'd never seen before. He wasn't like the others. He didn't walk in like a weary traveler, or sit quietly in a booth like the regulars. He appeared out of nowhere, standing at the door as though he had always been there, just waiting for the right moment to enter. He was tall, but thin, his face obscured by the brim of a dark hat that hid his eyes. The bell above the door didn't ring as he stepped inside, and the air around him felt colder, heavier. I watched as he walked past the counter, his footsteps silent on the floor. I wanted to turn and run, but my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't take my eyes off him. As he sat there at the farthest booth in the corner, the one near the broken window, I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. The man didn't look at me. He just sat there, his hands resting on the table, his fingers tapping gently. For what felt like an eternity, I stood frowning behind the counter, my heart racing in my chest. The diner had become something else alive, like it was waiting for him, waiting for something. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I walked over to the booth. The man looked up, and his eyes gleamed a hollow, empty blackness where I should have been. Coffee? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't speak. He just nodded, his head jerking slightly to the side. I hurried to the counter, pouring coffee into a cup as my hands shook. I knew something was terribly wrong, but I didn't know what. I couldn't stop myself from bringing him the coffee. When I returned to the booth, he was still staring at me, his gaze never leaving me. I set the cup down, my fingers brushing against the table. His hand twitched, just slightly. Who are you? I asked, my voice cracking. The man didn't answer. He reached out slowly and grasped the coffee cup, lifting it to his lips, and then vanished. I blinked, and in that split second, he was gone. There was no one in the booth, no sign of the man who had been sitting there just seconds before. The cup was still there, the coffee swirling, as if the man had just left in a hurry. I stood in shock, my heart hammering in my chest. This had gone far beyond the strange. This had crossed into otherworldly. I felt the weight of a presence in the room with me, a shadow that had been there all along but was only now revealing itself. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find out the truth, no matter what the cost. I made my way to the back storage room, where the map had once been. I pulled open the drawer beneath the counter and sifted through the clutter until my fingers found something strange, something I had never seen before. It was a small, weathered book, a journal, much like Harvey's, but this one was older, much older. It was bound in cracked leather, and the pages inside were brittle and yellowed. I opened it, my breath catching in my throat. The first page was a simple note, written in hurried script. The diner is a place of crossing. It binds people to it, holds them, no one leaves, and no one arrives by accident. I flipped through the pages, each one filled with more cryptic words, all pointing to the same thing. Lou's 24/7's Diner was no ordinary establishment. It was a place where realities bled together, a nexus between the living and the dead, the present and the past. There was a mention of a ritual, a ceremony that had been performed years ago before Lou O'Donnell had ever built the diner. The land had once been a crossroads, a meeting point for lost souls, travelers, and things that should not exist. When the diner was built, it had become a beacon, drawing in the souls of the lost and keeping them within its walls. Those who entered could never truly leave. And now, it was my turn. I didn't know what to do. The book was full of instructions, warnings that nothing could prepare me for the truth. The diner was alive, and it wanted me. The next morning, I went to Hal's office to confront him. If anyone knew anything, it would be him. But when I opened the door, I found the room empty. The desk was overturned, papers scattered across the floor, and the lights flickered wildly. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and something metallic. I turned to leave, but as I did, I saw it, a figure standing at the back of the room. It was Hal, but not the Hal I knew. His face was distorted, stretched, his body bent in unnatural angles. His eyes were black voids, staring straight through me. "You shouldn't have stayed," he rasped, his voice a low, guttural growl. "No one stays." Before I could react, the walls of the diner began to shift. The floor beneath my feet seemed to ripple, like water, and I was pulled toward the center of the room. I reached out, grasping for anything to hold onto, but my hands passed right through the counter. The diner was closing in on me, its hunger palpable. The windows cracked, and the walls seemed to pulse with life. The whispers I had been hearing, those same words I had feared, came rushing in from every direction. "You can never leave." I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I just accepted it. There was no escape from Lou's 24/7's Diner. Once you entered, you were bound to it, forever. To this day, Lou's 24/7's Diner still stands on Route 9, waiting for the next lost soul to cross its threshold. Some say it's a place where time doesn't exist, where the past and the present are woven together. Others claim it's a portal to somewhere else, somewhere darker. No one knows for sure, but I do. I'm still here, still waiting, and I'll never leave. If you like this story, don't forget to hit the like button, share and subscribe the channel. Help us grow. Thanks for watching.